It was a warm Friday evening in June, the kind of Texas night where the air held the heat long after the sun disappeared. The neighborhood was alive with the sound of sprinklers hissing and children chasing fireflies while the smell of barbecue drifted through the streets. At the end of the cul-de-sac stood the Carter home, a 2-story white house with navy shutters, a red door, and a porch swing that swayed gently in the breeze. To outsiders, it was the dream. Inside, Emily Carter moved through the kitchen in her sundress, setting the table with practiced grace. White plates, folded napkins, a vase of daisies in the center. She hummed softly, a nervous little tune she didn't even realize she was making. Her husband David would be downstairs any minute, freshly showered, wearing the confident smile that made neighbors adore him. But then came the buzzing. On the counter, David's phone lit up, once, twice, again. Normally, he never let it out of his sight. Emily hesitated, her chest tight. She told herself not to look. She trusted him. She loved him. But curiosity dug its claws in. She reached for it, hands trembling. One message glowed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Don't make me wait too long." To Claire, her world tilted. Claire, her best friend since high school. The woman who had been her maid of honor, who sat at this very kitchen table drinking coffee, who hugged her after bad days and laughed with her on good ones. The sound of water stopped upstairs. Footsteps moved across the floor. Emily dropped the phone back onto the counter as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered so loud she thought the whole house could hear it. David came down the stairs, sharp in his button-down shirt, wristwatch gleaming, hair still damp. He adjusted his cufflinks casually, looking every bit the charming real estate agent everyone admired. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her stillness. Emily forced a smile, masking the storm behind her eyes. "Yeah, everything's fine." Inside, she was shattering. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. Emily sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee, her eyes swollen from a night of no sleep. The doorbell rang. Her chest tightened. She knew that knock. She opened the door to find Claire Matthews standing there, all bright smiles and golden hair, carrying a box of muffins. "Thought I'd bring breakfast," Claire chirped, stepping inside like she owned the place. They sat at the table, the smell of blueberries rising from the muffins. Claire laughed and chatted about work, gossiping about neighbors. She was radiant, her voice smooth, her smile warm. To anyone else, it was just another morning. To Emily, it was poison disguised as sweetness. And then Claire said it. "Is David around? I wanted to ask him about that new development project." Emily gripped her mug tightly. "He left early. Meetings." Just for a second, Claire's eyes flickered, hesitation, guilt. Then the smile returned as if nothing had slipped. But Emily saw it. She saw everything. That night, Emily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above her. Beside her, David slept soundly, his breathing steady, his face peaceful. She turned toward him, tears stinging her eyes. This was the man who promised her forever. The man she trusted with her whole heart. And now she couldn't even look at him without feeling sick. She whispered into the dark, so soft even the night could barely hear her. "They think I'm blind. They think I'm weak. But they don't know me." The days that followed dragged on like torture. At church, Emily saw David brush Claire's shoulder in passing, so subtle no one else noticed. At a neighborhood barbecue, she caught a glance exchanged between them, quick but loaded with meaning. Each moment was another cut. Another betrayal, and yet Emily played her role. She smiled at neighbors. She hosted coffee with Claire. She laughed at David's jokes. From the outside, she was still the perfect wife. But inside, the fire was spreading. Late one night, long after the world had gone quiet, Emily sat alone at the dining table. The chandelier above cast a dim light, shadows crawling across the room. She placed her hands flat on the polished wood and stared at her reflection in its glossy surface. Her breathing slowed. Her tears had dried. What was left was something new, something sharp. In that silence, she made her decision. If they wanted to play with her heart, she would play with their lives. Her revenge had begun. The Texas summer rolled on, each day hotter than the last, but for Emily Carter, the heat didn't come from the sun. It burned from the inside, a fire fueled by betrayal. She smiled for the neighbors, waved from the porch, hosted dinners with Claire at her side. But behind closed doors, every glance, every word, every moment gnawed at her, She needed answers. She needed to know just how deep the lies ran. Emily began to watch David more closely. His patterns, his phone habits, his excuses. For years, she never doubted him. But now, every late-night call and every unexplained errand felt like another nail driven into her trust. He was slick, she gave him that. But he wasn't careful enough. One afternoon, when David left his briefcase on the kitchen counter, Emily noticed his laptop half open. Her heart pounded. She knew the risks. If he walked in, there would be no explaining. But her hands moved before her mind could stop them. She opened it. Password protected. Of course. But Emily had lived with David for 7 years. She knew his patterns. His passwords were always tied to something personal. She tried their anniversary date. No luck. She tried his mother's birthday. Still locked. She hesitated, then typed in, Claire, 1988. The screen blinked, then opened. Her chest tightened. There it was. Emails, messages, reservations at hotels under fake names. Pictures she couldn't bear to look at for more than a second. Each one cut deeper than the last. Emily shut the laptop, her hands trembling. Her body shook with fury, but her mind was sharp, clear. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. Confrontation would give them the satisfaction of explaining, of spinning stories, of denying. Emily didn't want words. She wanted something they couldn't take back. She turned her focus to Claire. When they met for coffee that week, Emily studied her friend with new eyes. Claire sat across from her at their favorite cafe, the smell of roasted beans in the air, sunlight cutting across her perfect features. She laughed at some story, tossing her hair back, and Emily forced herself to nod, to smile. Inside, she imagined her friend choking on every lie she had ever told. "Have you heard about that cabin on Lake Whitney?" Emily asked casually, stirring her iced coffee. "They say it's the perfect spot for a girl's weekend. No phones, no husbands, just us." "Like old times." Claire's eyes lit up. "That sounds amazing." "We need that," Emily smiled. She had her first piece of the plan, but revenge wasn't built overnight. Emily started documenting everything. She bought a hidden camera disguised as a phone charger and plugged it into the wall near the front door. Another one in the living room, tucked behind picture frames. She didn't have to wait long. Within a week, she had footage of David sneaking Claire into their home when he claimed to be working late. She watched the video over and over in the dim glow of her laptop. Her hands gripped the arm of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. They laughed together in her living room. They kissed in her kitchen. The home Emily had built was nothing more than their playground. Each recording was fuel. Each message she copied was a weapon. She wasn't gathering evidence to confront them. She was gathering it to destroy them. Still, Emily had to play her part. At dinner one evening, David casually mentioned a late-night meeting. Emily smiled sweetly, pretending to believe him. But when he left, she followed. She parked a block away from where he said he would be. Instead of an office building, she found his car outside a cheap motel. She sat there in her own car, fingers digging into the steering wheel, every instinct screaming to storm inside. But she didn't. She waited. She watched. And when David finally emerged 2 hours later, his tie loosened, hair messy, Emily knew she had been right all along. She drove home in silence. Rage burned through her veins, but alongside it was something stronger, patience. This wasn't about catching them red-handed. This was about setting the stage, pulling the strings, and letting them fall into the trap she was weaving. At night, Emily began writing everything down in a small leather journal she kept hidden under the floorboard of her closet. Dates, times, lies, patterns. She wrote not just what they did, but how it made her feel. The shame, the anger, the hunger for payback. She didn't want to forget a single detail. When the time came, every piece would matter. But even as she planned, the cracks showed in her mask. One evening, David came home late, his shirt untucked, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. He kissed her cheek and Emily flinched. "You okay?" he asked, searching her face. She smiled faintly. "Just tired," he bought it. He always bought it. Inside, she was screaming. Days passed, weeks. The summer deepened, but so did Emily's resolve. She didn't lash out. She didn't confront. She let them believe she was blind, that she was still the trusting wife and loyal friend. And the more convinced they were, the harder they would fall. Late one night, Emily stood on her porch staring into the quiet suburban street. The cicadas sang, the air was thick with heat, and the neighborhood slept peacefully. but inside her mind everything was sharp and alive. She knew what she had to do. It was the kind of late afternoon where the sun seemed unsure whether to stay or leave, slanting golden through the pines and setting the water on Lake Whitney aflame. The road in was a ribbon of gravel that crunched under tires, and the cabin sat back from the lake like a secret. Weathered cedar siding, a small porch with a rocking chair, lanterns already lit even though it was still too bright for candles. The air smelled like damp wood and distant smoke. Crickets tuned their endless song, and the lake licked the shore with patient, indifferent laps. Emily pulled into the makeshift driveway, her hands steady on the wheel even though her pulse thudded like a drum. She had packed light, 2 suitcases, a cooler with wine, and a small black bag that held the tools she'd need. Cameras, batteries, a microphone, and the one thing she hadn't yet played for anyone, the compilation of everything she'd collected. The leather journal with dates and times was tucked under her sweater like a talisman. Claire's car was already there, an older Subaru. Hairline scratches on the bumper, lipstick marks on the collar of the driver's seat, evidence of habit, of someone who never slowed down to think. Claire waved from the porch like everything was ordinary. She wore a sundress and a grin, the kind that used to reassure Emily in so many small ways. Now the grin looked brittle in the fading light. "Perfect spot, Em," Claire said, hugging Emily with the intimacy of people who had shared countless secrets. Exactly what we needed. Emily returned the hug with the practiced warmth of someone who'd rehearsed kindness for months. "Just like old times," she said quietly, and the words felt like glass. They carried coolers inside. The cabin smelled like cedar and old rugs, the kind of place that held other people's memories like dust. Emily set her bag down in the small living room beneath a mounted fish that looked garish in the dim light. She placed the charger-disguised camera on the coffee table, the lens angled toward the doorway. She slipped another behind a line of old paperbacks on a shelf, and a third behind the mantel clock. She checked them all with the mechanical calm of someone who had practiced this choreography alone for weeks. They drank wine. They toasted memories. Claire leaned in, animated, telling a story about some client who'd insisted on landscaping advice for their office. Emily laughed where appropriate. She asked questions. She let Claire think she was relaxed. When the sky bruised purple, Claire said, "So where's David tonight? You mentioned he was going to be out completing a closing?" Emily let the question hang for a heartbeat too long before she said, "No, he's not coming tonight." Claire's face shifted. Just a moment. A thin line of confusion passing through her features. "Oh, I figured he might show up later." "He won't." Emily's voice was steady. She set down her glass with a single soft click. "I wanted this to be just us." Claire smiled, a little too brightly, as if she could read the edges of Emily's calm and choose to ignore them. "Us old friends, no phones. No drama." "No phones," Emily agreed, and slipped her own into the little wooden box on the coffee table where guests tossed their devices. The box was decorative and harmless looking. Inside, Emily had hidden a tiny transmitter that would pick up any attempt to get a signal. She felt ridiculous writing out the details, yet every ridiculous little precaution had stacked into this precise cage. When night fell, they moved the party to the porch. The lanterns made halos around their heads. Below, the lake reflected a molten moon. Above, the pines whispered. Claire was more animated with the privacy, leaning closer, touching Emily's arm as she laughed. Each touch felt like a brand. "Remember when we camped behind the high school?" Claire said. "We swore we'd do this forever." "I remember," Emily said. "We promised we'd always be honest, right?" Claire's hand went still for the first time, the laugh dying on her lips. "Yeah, always." Emily's throat tightened. She smiled and waited. After a while, Emily suggested they watch a movie. She took the ancient DVD from a shelf, popped it into the player. Only it wasn't a rom-com or a thriller. It was a fabricated, innocuous-looking video file Emily had named Old Times and stored on a portable drive. She connected it to the little flat screen on the wall. Claire thought nothing of it. She sank into the worn couch, glass of wine in hand, and gave Emily the kind of attention that used to feel comforting. Emily dimmed the lanterns. The screen flickered. For a second, there was only the static snap of an old television. Then it started. She had expected to feel something. Vindication, power, closure. But the first image hit her differently. It was their living room back in Dallas, the angle from behind the couch, and there was David, slipping in at night. Then, impossible to deny, Claire on the sofa, a hand at his neck. The camera zoomed closer. Their faces were unmistakable. The smell of betrayal filled the cabin even through a screen. Claire's laugh cut off mid-sentence. Her hand, still curled around a wine glass, tightened until her knuckles shone white. The screen moved through clips. Stolen embraces in a dim hallway, a kiss by the fireplace, David's hand at Claire's waist. The footage was intimate, raw, damning. Claire's face changed. Guilt, panic, then anger peeled across it like film. "Emily, what is this?" she whispered, but it was already too loud in the room. Emily let the silence build. Her mouth was dry. She wanted Claire to speak, to apologize, to crumble. What came instead was a lie. "I thought this would be our time," Claire said. "You brought this here to scare me? For what, for attention?" Emily's smile was thin. "No, I brought us here for the truth." Claire looked down, eyes wet. "David promised me, he said he was leaving." "I thought, Emily, I didn't mean to." "You thought you didn't mean to?" Emily echoed. "You thought it was just going to happen like that? You thought promises were bargains you could trade in?" Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked like someone who'd been caught with a hand in a cookie jar. She might have been on the verge of confession, but David's truck lights cut through the trees like a knife, headlights slicing across the porch. "You told him to come?" Claire said, panic rising in her voice. "I told him he had to be here if he wanted to be honest," Emily said. She felt the sting of tears hot at her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was not the time for tears. David's truck growled to a stop. He stepped out, shirt wrinkled, jaw pinched, eyes raw with sleep or something stronger. He walked up the gravel path like a man carrying the weight of both his arrogance and his dismay. The porch light washed over his face, making his expression look stark and brittle. "Emily?" he said, voice tight. What's going on here?" Emily stood. She felt the small camera behind the mantel buzz faintly in her ear through the feed she watched on her laptop tucked under her sweater. The little red light of recording assured her she would have every second. "You were supposed to tell me," she said. "You lied." Claire lied. "I gave both of you chances to stop." David's eyes flicked to Claire, pleading impossibly with the woman he'd betrayed and the one he'd been unfaithful with. "Emily, this isn't what you think." Save it," Emily said. She moved to the coffee table, picked up a remote, and with an even hand, she pressed play on a second clip, a clip David hadn't seen yet. The screen filled with a different angle. It showed David in a dim parking lot talking with a man in a suit. Hands exchanged, an envelope, the glint of cash. Emily had filmed this weeks ago, using a camera tucked into the mailbox on the street near the office, the one David always used. The footage showed him receiving money, slipping it into his briefcase, walking away with the furtive posture of someone who'd just been paid off. David's face went white as paper. He looked like the man finally realizing the floor had dropped out from under him. "What is that?" he said, throat raw. "That's the same man who offered you an easy out," Emily said. She felt a small, ruthless satisfaction at the effect. "That's escrow money, isn't it?" David's jaw moved. His eyes darted between Emily and Claire as if he might find refuge in one and not the other. "You don't know what you're talking about," but Claire was already unraveling. The veneer fell. "What, escrow? You embezzled? You lied to everyone?" Her voice rose, sharp and incredulous. "David, what did you do?" David, who had always been able to smile his way through a deal and charm his way out of a problem, sat down heavily on the porch step. For the first time Emily had ever seen, he looked smaller. Not broken would be too literal, but diminished in a new and humbling way. "Listen," he said, voice shaking. "It's complicated. I was trying to keep everything together." "I would keep everything together?" Emily repeated. "Like you were keeping your affair and your fraud and your lies all in one neat little pile?" Claire's eyes filled with something darker than shame, fear. "What do you mean, fraud?" "David, you promised." "I didn't promise to lose his company money," David snapped, a quick, vicious flare of anger cutting through the shame. "You think I wanted this? I was trying to—" "Claire, you knew about the project. You said we could—" "Stop talking," Claire said. She turned on him, the accusation fierce and raw. "You dragged me into this. You told me everything was taken care of. You told me we'd be together. You told me you were done. You told him to lie to me," Emily said. The sentence cut the air. You two made promises you had no right to make. The porch became a jagged battleground of words. The camera feed recorded it all, the raw human wreckage of 3 lives careening into one another. The small room felt too small for so much truth. Then Emily hit play on a 3rd file. This was the one she had been saving. 2 hours recorded, 1 clip stitched to another, pardoning nothing. It was a montage of conversations, not just romantic transgressions, but the way deals were made in a city that smiled while it bled people dry. It showed David in his office, late nights with spreadsheets, entries deleted, wires rearranged, a ledger altered. It showed Claire on the phone in a hushed, anxious whisper about dates and cover stories, promising to be careful. It showed the man in the suit slipping money across a table with the dry efficiency of someone who'd done this before. As the playback rolled, the faces on the porch changed. Claire's cheeks fell, suddenly very young and raw. David's mouth moved silently, trying to fit words into something that might pass for explanation. Emily watched them both with a strange calm. She felt like someone standing at the center of a storm and knowing exactly which way the wind would blow. "You were going to ruin everything," Emily said to David and then to Claire. "This isn't just about love. This is about greed. Lies layered on lies." Claire covered her face with trembling hands. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she whispered. You were supposed to get what you wanted and leave me with nothing," Emily said. "You planned to take everything." David slammed his hands against his knees, the sound raw. "You think I wanted this? You think I chose this? There were pressures, investors. If I didn't divert funds, they'd take everything. I thought I could fix it. You thought, Emily repeated, the word a cut. The night around them seemed to lean in, listening. The lake below was a black mirror. The word consequence filled the space like a living thing. For a moment, no one moved. Then Claire scrambled up, her voice bright and brittle. "I'm leaving," she said, but it wasn't a threat. It was a flight. She gathered her things in a wild, clumsy sweep and stumbled toward her car. Outside, she paused, hand on the door, and turned to look at Emily. "I didn't know about that," she said, voice breaking. "I swear, Emily, I swear I didn't know about the escrow." There was a pleading there that was almost childish in its desperation. Emily thought of the nights she'd sat alone, cataloging evidence while Claire laughed across from her at the table, oblivious or willing. She thought of David, of buildings and contracts and the smile that sold everything he touched. She could have let Claire go. She could have watched them both fracture and implode with nothing to stop them. Instead, Emily walked to the edge of the porch and looked out at the dark water. The moon scattered silver shards across the lake. She felt the weight of what she could do, what she had already done, and knew this moment was the fulcrum. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Not to record, but to upload. She had been deliberate. Clips anonymized and edited to protect the legal tightropes she'd navigated, but enough to burn reputations, to cause pain, to make the damage irreversible. She'd made contact with a local blogger months ago, someone hungry for scandal. The plan had always been to ensure this didn't just linger in private. It had to be public, inexorable, final. As she tapped the screen, a truck door banged down the road and headlights swept across the trees. Sirens, faint at first, then growing nearer, glanced off the water. The sound was unexpected, like the crack of a pistol in the hush. David cursed. No, don't. He lunged for the screen, for the phone, but Emily snapped it shut and tucked it back in her bag. "You think you can fix this with cash?" she said softly. "You think you can bargain your way out of this life you broke?" David's face crumpled. He looked not like the man who sold houses, but someone who had watched every value he thought steady dissolve. "What are you going to do, Em?" he asked, the plea stripped of pretense. Emily put the phone away and walked to the porch rail, the wood warm under her palms. Her voice was low, flat, full of the finality she'd practiced in the mirror 100 times. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you are," she said. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows where your loyalties lie." Lights flashed down the road, blue and red, reflecting in the lake like a heartbeat. For a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The siren slowed, then cut abruptly. A figure stepped out of the dark, tall, lean, a policeman's silhouette at the edge of the gravel drive. "Is everything okay here?" A voice called, official and neutral. They all stared. Claire's hands trembled. David's mouth opened and closed without sound. Emily looked at the officer and felt no fear, only the clean, cold satisfaction of a plan that had reached this waypoint. "You should come talk to us," the officer said, coming closer, flashlight sweeping. "There's been reports, disturbances in the area, and someone called in about suspicious activity." Someone had already called. Had Emily expected it? Had she set a chain in motion that would now pull others into its orbit? She thought of the blogger, the uploaded clips, the anonymous tips she'd sent, the comments she'd seeded. All of it moving toward the exact point of fracture. Claire's car sat idling in the drive, a small island of culpability. The officer stepped onto the porch, shoes creaking, the light catching David's face and making his shame look almost cinematic. He asked questions, the type that left echoing spaces where answers should be. Names were given. Statements murmured. The night stretched. Emily watched and let the truth be a weight she was finally willing to put down on the table. When the officer asked for identification, Claire scrambled for her purse. David fumbled in his pockets. None of it mattered. The legal gears had begun to move, and once they did, there would be no simple repairs. Emily felt something loosen inside her, a small uncoiling of adrenaline braided with a grief that she would carry. She had set this in motion. She had wanted this, even if she hadn't wanted the full fallout. But standing there in the lantern light, with the lake murmuring below and the siren lights painting the trees, she understood how thin the walls between love and ruin could be. She put her hands in her pockets and watched the officers take statements, watched the faces of the two people who had torn at her life. In the end, she didn't feel triumphant so much as quiet, like someone who'd crossed a line and now had to learn how to live on the other side. As the officers' flashlights bobbed and the night swallowed the last of the commotion, Emily stepped back into the cabin and closed the door on the cool air. She felt both exposed and oddly relieved. There were more moves to be made. Press releases to anonymize, emails to forward, contacts to nudge. But for the first time since that message lit up David's phone, she felt like she wasn't acting out of dizzying rage alone. She was a woman with a plan, and the world outside the cabin windows was about to learn her vocabulary. Claire's car peeled away into the dark, headlights receding like someone fleeing a scene. David sat on the porch step as the officer finished his paperwork, eyes hollow, mouth set. Emily watched him, and for a moment, something like pity flickered through her. Then the feeling passed. She had been loved and betrayed, and she had dared herself to become something sharper. The night settled. The lake kept its secrets, but now the surface would no longer lie. She sat at the kitchen table where they had eaten earlier, opened her notebook, and wrote 3 words. Now it begins. Her revenge wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was a plan, a living, breathing thing taking shape in the shadows. And soon, neither David nor Claire would see it coming. Morning light broke across Dallas like a blade, harsh and unforgiving. The Carter home no longer felt like a sanctuary. Emily sat at the kitchen island, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. The air smelled of stale wine and secrets, the silence heavy enough to crush. David hadn't come home after the cabin. Claire had gone dark. The world felt both eerily still and unbearably loud. Her phone buzzed. She stared at it for a moment before picking it up. A notification from a local blog flashed on the screen. Prominent realtor tied to fraud investigation. Emily exhaled, steady and controlled. She had expected it. She had planned for it. But seeing David's name in bold letters, his smiling face next to words like embezzlement and affair, sent a shiver through her. It wasn't just their world crumbling anymore. It was public. By noon, the phones started ringing. Neighbors whispering, friends pretending to check in, reporters leaving voicemails. Emily didn't answer. She sat at her desk, sunlight pouring through the blinds, and scrolled through the avalanche online. David's polished reputation was unraveling thread by thread. Photos she had leaked, him and Claire in compromising positions, were spreading across forums and gossip pages. The footage of his late-night meetings with the man in the suit had gone viral. It was everything she wanted. And yet, in the quiet corners of her mind, she wondered if it was enough. David finally came home that night. His face was pale, his shirt rumpled, his tie gone. He looked like a man who had been chewed up by the world and spit back out. He slammed the door shut and leaned against it, his chest heaving. "You did this!" he spat, his eyes wild. Emily stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, expression calm. "No, David, you did this. I just made sure no one could ignore it." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "You think you're some kind of hero? You ruined me. You ruined us." "There was no us left to ruin," she said softly. David's jaw clenched, his knuckles white as his hands balled into fists. "Do you have any idea what you've started? These people I dealt with, these aren't the kind of men you cross. They'll come after me. After you. After everything." Emily felt a chill, but she didn't let it show. "Then maybe you shouldn't have crawled into bed with them." "Or with her," David flinched. His anger cracked for a moment, and something like regret flickered across his face. But it was too late. The damage was done. That same night, Emily drove through the city, the lights of downtown Dallas reflecting off the glass towers. She needed air. She needed space. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from an unknown number. "You've made powerful enemies. Watch your back." Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. Was it a bluff? A scare tactic? Or had David's dirty dealings unearthed something even darker than his infidelity? Meanwhile, Claire wasn't silent anymore. The next morning, a new headline appeared online. "Claire Matthews speaks out, I was manipulated." The article painted Claire as a victim, a woman deceived by David's lies, coerced into the affair. She posed for photographs, her eyes red from staged tears, her voice trembling as she spoke about betrayal and heartbreak. Emily read every word, her teeth grinding. Claire had flipped the script. Now she was the innocent friend, the one who had been used. Public sympathy poured in for her, comments flooding with pity, but Emily knew the truth. She had the recordings, the phone calls, the texts. She had Claire laughing as she told David she'd handle Emily if things got complicated. She had proof that Claire wasn't a victim. She was a partner in every betrayal. The city buzzed with scandal. David's company collapsed under the weight of the investigation. Investors fled. His license was suspended. Reporters camped outside their home, cameras flashing whenever Emily stepped outside. She kept her head high, dressed in neat blouses and sunglasses, speaking little. The less she said, the more people filled in the blanks with their own stories. But behind closed doors, Emily was still writing in her journal. Every detail. Every betrayal. Every lie Claire told the public. She wasn't done. Not yet. Then came the gala. It was a fundraiser for the local hospital, an event Emily and David had attended every year. Emily hadn't planned on going, but when she heard Claire was on the guest list, she changed her mind. That night, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and sequined gowns, laughter bubbling like champagne. Emily walked in alone, her black dress sleek and sharp, her presence turning heads. Whispers followed her like shadows. Across the room, Claire stood by the bar, draped in pale silk, her hair curled perfectly, smiling at every camera that pointed her way. David wasn't there. He had disappeared into the mess he created, leaving Claire to bask in her newfound sympathy. Emily approached slowly, the crowd parting as they sensed the tension crackling in the air. Claire turned, her smile faltering for just a second before she regained composure. "Emily," she said, voice smooth, rehearsed. "I didn't expect to see you here." Emily's smile was razor thin. "I'm sure you didn't." Claire leaned in, lowering her voice. "I know you're angry, but I had to protect myself." "David, he's dangerous." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Emily said. "I understand you lied to me. To everyone. And I understand you're still lying." Claire's mask slipped, just for a breath. Her eyes hardened, her lips pressed tight. Then she laughed softly, covering it with charm. "You won't win, Emily. People believe me. Not you." Emily leaned closer, her voice low, her words cutting like glass. "That's because they haven't seen what I have. Yet." Claire's smile froze. The rest of the night was a blur of cameras, champagne, and whispered rumors. But Emily left with a plan sharper than ever. If Claire wanted to play the victim, Emily would show the world her true face. And when she did, there would be no coming back for either Claire or David. Autumn came to Dallas quietly. The kind of season that didn't shout but whispered its presence through cooler winds and leaves turning brittle underfoot. The chaos of summer had given way to something calmer on the surface, but beneath, Emily Carter knew storms still brewed. David was gone. His company dismantled, his license revoked, his reputation shattered. Last Emily heard, he had fled the city, possibly hiding in Arizona under a friend's name. The authorities were still circling, still gathering evidence of his fraud. But Emily didn't care where he was. His face no longer haunted her at night the way it once did. Claire, however, was a different story. Claire had reinvented herself as the tragic heroine. She gave interviews on morning talk shows, her voice trembling as she spoke of betrayal. She posed for glossy magazine spreads about finding strength after lies. The world bought her act. Sponsors approached her, charities invited her to speak, but Emily had been patient all this time for a reason. One crisp evening, Emily sat alone in her living room, the fireplace casting shadows across the walls. On the coffee table lay her leather journal, now thick with entries, and a small flash drive. Inside it, every recording, every message, every damning piece of evidence that proved Claire was no victim. Proof she had plotted, lied, and betrayed. Emily uploaded it all to an anonymous server. She scheduled it to release at dawn, and then she closed her laptop and sat back, staring into the flames. Her revenge would be complete, but fate wasn't finished with her yet. At 3 a.m., a noise woke her, a sharp crack against glass. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. The house was dark except for the sliver of moonlight spilling across the floor. Another sound came, heavier this time, from downstairs. Emily grabbed the small bat she kept under her bed and crept down the stairs, each step slow, deliberate. The living room window was shattered, shards glittering across the carpet. The curtains swayed in the cold night air, and then she saw her. Claire stood in the center of the room, her silk dress torn, her hair wild, her eyes burning with a madness Emily had never seen before. In her hand, a kitchen knife glinted. "You ruined me," Claire hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "Everything I had, you took it." Emily tightened her grip on the bat, her chest heaving. "You ruined yourself, Claire. All I did was show the world who you are." Claire laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "The world doesn't care about truth. They care about stories. And you stole mine," she lunged. The knife flashed in the moonlight. Emily swung the bat with everything in her, the crack of wood against metal echoing through the house. Claire staggered, the knife clattering to the floor. For a moment they stood, chest to chest, breathing hard, the weight of years of friendship and betrayal pressing between them. Emily whispered, "You should have stayed away." Claire's eyes filled with something unreadable, rage, sorrow, regret, before she collapsed onto the carpet. The room was silent again, except for Emily's ragged breaths. She stood over the body of the woman who had once been her closest friend, the woman who had helped shatter her marriage, the woman who had tried to take everything. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply picked up her phone, dialed 911, and waited for the sirens to come. By sunrise, the file she had uploaded went live. The recording spread like wildfire, painting Claire not as the victim she claimed to be, but as the manipulative conspirator she truly was. The internet tore her apart. Sympathy turned to scorn, but none of it mattered anymore. Claire was gone. Months later, Emily sat on a bench overlooking White Rock Lake, the water calm under a pale winter sky. The city behind her buzzed on, but she felt strangely apart from it, as though she had stepped into another world. People passed by, joggers, families, couples holding hands. They smiled at her, a stranger among them. She had lost her husband. She had lost her best friend. She had burned her old life to ash. But in that ruin, there was also freedom. As she closed her journal for the final time, she thought about the words she had written the night this all began. "They think I'm blind. They think I'm weak. But they don't know me, now the world knew her." And though she carried scars that would never fade, Emily Carter was no longer the woman who once stood in a kitchen, trembling over a single text message. She had become something else, something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous. The wind rippled across the lake. Emily stood, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders, and walked away without looking back. Because revenge wasn't just a moment. It was a transformation, and she had already stepped fully into her new life.